I had a dream where I died, lifted up out of my body, passed through the attic where I saw a leak. I should look at that later, probably. Into the sky, through the clouds, and now that I think about it, I should have looked back because now I can't confirm if the earth was round or flat. Anyway, right before I breached the borderline for the closest reaches of space, I was transported to the pearly gates, where the great book of life was open and it was weighed on how I kept the commandments. But to my surprise, there was no debate. I was like, wait. On earth, there's much discussion about Mary being a virgin, the Messiah having wives, and if God is God or if it's Jesus. Peter looked puzzled. I was like, don't play, bro. Yeshua. He was like, yeah. We laughed at that for a couple centuries. You can talk about it with him when you see him, but it has no bearing on entry. I laughed about it because that was comforting. But then I said, what about the Holy Trinity? And God having three parts. He said, welcome are those that keep the way. Each man only has one heart. I smirked and laughed to hide my frustration and continued to ask, which one is correct of all the 45,000 Christian denominations? He said, what's a Christian? I laughed and said, Peter, why are you playing? You know what? I discern that you've watched me studying, amused at every turn, and this area isn't even usually manned. You came here especially just to play with me. And the biggest sign is that in all this space, it's just you and me. There isn't even a line. He said, maybe. I took a deep breath and said, behind children and a wife I've left. At this point, he's tracking me while I'm pacing. Although this has been fun, at this time I must decline. I have other commitments. But before I go, I have one more question. He said, of course. I said, thank you. If Abraham had Hagar without being judged by God, and David would have had another wife if he wished, don't you think that monogamy being the so-called new standard is kind of odd? Peter smirked and then started to laugh loudly, might I add. He was literally rolling, and in a flash, the next thing I knew, my eyes were open. My wife was shaking me. She said I wasn't breathing and she couldn't feel my heart. I looked at her and said, thanks, you just snatched me from heaven. She was like, oh, my bad. Well, how was it? I said, Peter is dark. I told her all about it and couldn't get back to sleep, obviously. So I cracked open my Bible and landed on the one passage in all the pages and landed where Yeshua named the two greatest commandments. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Love thy neighbor as thyself. On these two commandments hang all the law and all the prophets. And verily, I imagine he said it with a smile.